So coming up next Tuesday is going to be Contender Series 2025, week number 3. And I am recording and uploading this on Friday night. So I am coming out before the odds have dropped. So I'm not actually too sure what we're looking at for this card. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. I think this is a hard card to predict. I think this is a card which the underdogs, whoever they might be, because I don't know who they are right now, are going to be live. I think there's some heavy hitters on both sides of nearly every single one of these fights. I think there are a lot of these guys here that have a lot of power to put people out. I think that this is going to be one of those cards which is going to feature a lot of bangers. It's not necessarily like the best card of the season in my opinion, but I think that it is a card that is going to be filled with a lot of excitement and a lot of very, very good fights in my opinion. Now, strap in, because this is going to be a longer intro. I've got a big thing to address. I'd like to thank everyone for helping me reach that 10,000 subscriber goal. It does mean a lot to me. I have been doing YouTube for a long time. I've been doing YouTube for 4 years on my channel. And I know a lot of those older videos have been deleted, but they weren't very good, and a lot of them got copyright claimed as well. I did do a big write-up on Twitter and also my YouTube posts, thanking everyone for their support. And I'm going to have to cut off the intro early, because I'm going to cough, because I'm still sick, which is why I'm wearing the hat. So the first fight of the night is going to be between two heavyweights, Darion Abbey and Donte Johnson. This is a very short notice matchup that was put together on short notice because Brando Perez and Alicia Allison both got signed to the UFC and are now going to be fighting at UFC Perth. And I'm honestly really looking forward to this fight. And I honestly do think that it could be a lot closer than I think a lot of people are probably expecting it to. Darion Abbey is a big guy, he's 6'6", he seems to be a pretty talented kickboxer as well, with professional kickboxing fights, but more importantly, he actually does have a big win over Alik Lorenz, who's also fighting on this card as well, and he knocked him out in 33 seconds. He also does have a couple of other pretty interesting performances. This fight against Yakhyaev was a banger, a really, really fun fight in my opinion, and then after that, he had a couple of other performances that I did kind of find of note. This was a 25-minute victory over Courier. I can't believe Courier lasted all 5 rounds. Like, Abbey was piecing him up on the feet, man. And Courier was just tough. Like, he even dropped Courier badly in the second round, and Courier still survived. And in that fight, we actually saw a lot of wrestling out of Abbey. Patrick Martin also did hurt Abbey a lot in moments in that matchup, but every single time Abbey got dropped, he was able to actually take down Patrick Martin, which I found quite interesting. So we did see a lot of wrestling in these two more recent performances from him, which I think could be quite an interesting sort of change of pace for him if he does take on Donte Johnson, because as I did say, Abbey being a 6'6", very high volume kickboxer as well, I would say. He has been getting caught against some other lesser strikers, in my opinion, in his more recent matchups. And Donte Johnson is a very fast kickboxer. He is actually typically fighting at 205 pounds. Abbey has fought at 205 pounds in the past, but all of his recent fights are at heavyweight. Johnson's fast. Man, he's got crazy, crazy striking. He actually has a win over Ryan Parker, who, guess what? Alik Lorenz also has a win over, but in the matchup, he was struggling with the range of Parker a lot, which I think could be interesting because he's taking on a 6'6" guy himself, and Parker's also like 6'5", 6'6" himself. But then he also had the crazy performance over James Ford, who was trying to take him down the whole time. And Johnson defended all of those takedowns, no problem, and eventually put out James Ford brutally unconscious, folding him over. It was a ridiculous victory for Donte Johnson in that fight. So this is an interesting one because it is going to come down to whether or not I think Donte Johnson can close the distance without getting caught on the way in, or defend takedowns of Abbey if Abbey is going to attempt them. So it's quite an interesting one for me because I could genuinely see a world where Abbey is tagging up Johnson from range, just given the fact that he is the traditional heavyweight here with the range advantage, and we did see Johnson struggle a little bit with the range of Ryan Parker. But at the same time, I have seen Abbey get caught up and close a couple of times in his fights. I saw him get caught up and close against Yakhyaev. I saw him get caught up and close against Patrick Martin. He actually got dropped a couple of times against Martin in the first 2 rounds. So I think that eventually Johnson's going to close that distance and he is going to land a big enough shot to finish the fight. So I'm picking Donte Johnson to win this matchup on very short notice. The next fight is one of the best matchups of the season, Cristian Perez versus Manoel Sousa. Two guys at 155 pounds, which I honestly think are very small for the weight class. More so Cristian Perez. Now, Perez is an interesting case for me because I actually thought that he had signed to the UFC. He did leave Combate in what was a pretty public dispute, I would say, especially kind of from Combate's side, I would say. And pretty much it was kind of rumored that the UFC had picked him up because that's why he wanted to leave Combate, was because he wanted to sign with the UFC. But it looks like he's got to go through Manoel Sousa to do it. Perez is a wild man, dude. Like, he started his matchup against Bruno Canetti with an Imanari roll. Seconds into the fight, he's rolling for Bruno Canetti's legs. And eventually he knocks him out in 90 seconds, which is crazy. Against Pietrahita, he's throwing out a lot of high volume out there. Actually ends up nearly trying to get a rear naked choke at the end of the first round and then knocks him out at the start of the second round. It was insane. And then I also watched a couple of others older fights as well. And in those older fights, he is grappling a lot more than he has been in some of his more recent fights, in my opinion, as well. His loss to Enrique Gonzalez was an eye-opener for me because of the way that he lost it. Now, he actually lost this fight after fighting 2 fights before in the same night, which is kind of crazy. So you can, in my opinion, put a little bit of an asterisk on this performance, just kind of given the nature of the activity here that was required. But he lost this fight to Enrique Gonzalez because he was getting controlled. He actually spent a lot of the first round attempting submissions, and I think that he potentially gassed himself out in that situation. And in the second and the third round, Enrique Gonzalez got takedowns on him and controlled him in top control in the second and third round and kind of just won the fight in that way. And that kind of does tell me that there is opportunity for Sousa to maybe slow down the pace against Perez and control him on top control. Aside from that, really just in general, Perez on the feet, he is just wild. He throws a lot of volume out there. He doesn't really attempt takedowns that much. Like, there's not really traditional takedowns, in my opinion. They're kind of more, he will work the clinch and then he will try and get a takedown from there. He's not just diving for takedowns from open space. But he's a wild, wild man in the cage, man. He does do a lot of damage as well with a lot of volume. Manoel Sousa, in my opinion, probably most well known for his knockout victory over Mauricio Rufy. And this is an interesting one because he actually hurt Rufy many times in this fight. And due to what I would consider to be relatively poor fight IQ, just didn't finish the fight until this point in the second round. He actually hurt Rufy badly at the start of the second round and then decided to attempt a takedown instead of going out there and trying to finish the fight. But eventually just slumped Rufy. Rufy was put out pretty badly in this fight, slumped over against the cage. And then he also, in his Bellator debut, went out there against Tim Wilde and slumped him. And the commentators were just yapping about how good Wilde's movement was. And Dan Hardy was talking about how great Tim Wilde was because Wilde's from England and this fight was actually taking place in London. And then Manoel Sousa brutally slumps him with one punch, just brutally. Like, Tim Wilde's still out cold when they're announcing him as the winner. And Dan Hardy just goes dead silent. It was kind of funny. As someone who doesn't really like Hardy, it was quite funny. Even though I actually really like Wilde, so it was quite sad to see. But very good win for Sousa. Against Paulo Henrique Lia, this was an odd split decision, but this was a good one for me, especially when it comes to this matchup against Perez, because Lia was attempting a lot of takedowns against Manoel Sousa, and Manoel Sousa was showing very good scrambling, anti-grappling ability to get out of these positions and get in his own dominant positions. Now, he still made a lot of mistakes, in my opinion, because of those mistakes, he put himself in bottom position a lot, which isn't very good, but, you know, I mean, I think that I saw out of him at least that he can escape submissions and put himself out of bad positions. Colgan beats him. This was a controversial decision. A lot of people think Colgan actually lost. I do think Colgan won. In that fight, I think Sousa's biggest kind of weakness was his takedown defense. But aside from that, he looked okay. And then against Barros, I think he fought a very safe fight against Barros. So, you know, a lot of pressure, but a lot of clinch pressure as well. And I'm going to cough. Just give me a moment. I'm sorry. We're back. A lot of pressure against barrels, but in general, Manoel Sousa has a lot of pressure. That's how he was able to knock out Rufy. That's how he was not able to knock out Tim Wild, because Wild was running away from him the whole time. So this matchup's interesting to me, but I think like the best opportunity for Perez to win is to get a submission over Manoel Sousa. And I think that when the fight is on the feet, I think Sousa's pressure is going to be too much for Perez. Perez gets pressured back very easily by nearly every single one of his opponents. So I think that Sousa is going to be able to pressure Perez, maybe even get a takedown on Perez. I don't really know if Sousa would be willing to offensively grapple against Perez, but if Perez finds himself in a situation where he's looking for submissions, we have seen from Sousa that he can escape positions against Tim Wild before. So I'm picking Manoel Sousa to win this matchup, and to win this matchup by decision. And to be brutally honest with you guys, I actually went into tape study expecting to be picking Perez. So after doing the study and looking into the fights, I actually like the style of Sousa, and the matchups that really kind of stood out to me is why I think he can beat him was the matchup against Paulo Henrique Laya, and the win over Tim Wild as well, because Wild was moving a lot in that matchup like Perez does, and Sousa was still able to catch him, so I'd like to see that out of him. The next fight is at 205 pounds and features Alik Lorenz, who I've actually already mentioned a couple of times in this video without even getting to his fight, because of course he has a win over Ryan Parker, who Donte Johnson has a win over, and his one loss is to Darion Abbey, who was on this card. Alik Lorenz is a very odd fighter in my opinion, because I actually consider him to be a wrestler grappler, but nearly every single one of his wins happen in the first round by knockout, and a lot of his wins actually happen by KO on the feet, with a couple of exceptions, but we'll get to that in a moment. Lorenz, I think, has a very odd style on the feet. Like, I don't really think he's very defensively responsible, neither is Yakhyaev, but he just comes forward and he throws overhands all the time. It's a very heavy pressure, very heavy overhand ability, and he does have a couple of good wins. You know, he's got a win over Ben Parrish, who I do consider to be pretty good. And despite Ryan Parker's record not being that good, I actually think he's a decent enough striker. But with that being said, I was concerned with how much Ryan Parker was finding success on the feet against Lorenz in the first rounds of this matchup. Now, Parker gassed out towards the end. Lorenz was starting to do a lot of damage, and that's how he got the win. The win over Thomas Powell was odd. Now, Lorenz was catching him early and hurting him a lot on the feet, but Powell attempted a takedown while it looked like he was kind of half unconscious, and then he just gave up when he couldn't get the takedown, and Lorenz went back and finished him. It was a really, really odd finish, in my opinion. And then against Ben Parrish, the big tuna, former Bellator fighter, of course, if you know, he actually has a massive win over Cristian Edwards in that matchup as well. Kind of the same sort of situation. We see Alik Lorenz go forward and really kind of throw his overhands. Now, with that being said, he's taking on a guy that doesn't really throw punches. Abdulrakhman Yakhyaev, not really a boxer. In fact, I will say he's not a boxer at all. He wants to circle, and he wants to throw body kicks, he wants to throw kicks, and then he wants to wrestle, and he wants to get submissions from there. I am very impressed by Yakhyaev's wrestling and grappling ability, but I'm not impressed by his striking ability. His hands are by his waist at all times, all the time, which does scare me a lot, because he is taking on a guy that can hit hard. But aside from that, I think that when it comes down to the wrestling and the grappling, I do think that he is the better wrestler and grappler out of the two. As long as he doesn't get caught by one of the big overhands from Alik Lorenz, I think that Yakhyaev should find success with the wrestling and the grappling from there. Now, if the striking can get better, I think that Yakhyaev could be a prospect to look out for in the future. So to kind of break down this fight simply, Lorenz is a very wild striker that does have wrestling and grappling in his back pocket for sure. Yakhyaev doesn't really strike very well, in my opinion. He only really throws body kicks and kicks. His hands are very low, which scares me. But I think he's a very good wrestler and grappler. I'm picking Yakhyaev by submission pretty early. Alright, I'm sorry for the breakdown so far, guys. It hasn't been very good, but I'm really struggling through it at this point, so I'm probably going to speed it up a little bit. Marcio Barbosa versus Damon Wilson does deserve a much longer breakdown than probably what I'm going to give it, because I think this is a banger. I really do. Marcio Barbosa is one of the most insane regional fighters that you can watch right now. 27 years old, 13 wins by KO in the first round, 2 wins by submission in the first round. All of his fights kind of take place in the exact same way. It's actually ridiculous what he does in his matchups. He just comes forward, like pressures like a madman and blitzes all the time. And then he lands. And when he lands with power and he just puts people out cold. It is brutal what he does. He doesn't really throw that many kicks, in my opinion. He just kind of just throws boxing combinations and just hopes for the best. And more often than not, it works out quite well for him. Two things about Marcio Barbosa that are very, very big concerns. His takedown defense is not very good. And his cardio is also awful. He actually was put in a pretty good matchup up there against Gabriel Santos before the unfortunate, very quick KO to the second rounds against Santos. But that was a banger as well while it lasted. But every single fight, in my opinion, of his, that it's lasted, I would say, longer than 4 minutes, you can tell that his cardio isn't fantastic. And despite, this loss being in 2022, and all of his wins being in the first round, it's impossible to know what his cardio is going to look like in a matchup like this. But I think he does beat Damon Wilson. I do think he does knock out Damon Wilson. And I'll tell you guys why in a second. I think Damon Wilson's hittable on the feet. I think that Damon Wilson, if he wants to find his most success in this matchup, I think he's actually going to need to go out there and wrestle. But we haven't actually been seeing a lot of wrestling out of Damon Wilson in his more recent fights. Now, to be fair, to give him the credit, it's because he's been knocking these guys out in the first round, but this is a big step down in competition from the guys that he was losing to before. I consider John D. Jesus to be a pretty good fighter. So I don't really see too much shame in losing to John D. Jesus, but he kind of lost that fight because he couldn't get the takedowns. Now, I did just say that Barbosa's takedown defense isn't very good at all, really. But if he can kind of circle off and just kind of get away from the takedowns for long enough, I think eventually he's going to land. And then Tobias Harila is also a big-time powerhouse. Actually, I think he was meant to be on the Contender Series, but he couldn't get a visa. Yes, against Pajuelo. He would have smoked Pajuelo in hindsight, right? But anyway, Harila is also a very powerful guy like Barbosa, and if he wanted to MMA math it out, he did catch Damon Wilson. So I think if Damon Wilson is going to have his best chance in this matchup, he should wrestle, because as I said, Barbosa is just a madman on the feet. I know this is not a technical breakdown that I'm giving at all right now, I'm sorry, but I don't think that Marcio Barbosa can get a technical breakdown. Like, his fights are all very similar. He goes out there, he blitzes forward all the time, and he just throws down and he just gets knockouts in the first round. And honestly, every single time you watch it happen, you're amazed that it happened. And he just does it over and over and over again. It's actually insane what this guy does in the cage. I think he's going to win this matchup by KO. Damon Wilson, potentially a live dog, because I do think Barbosa is going to be a favorite in this fight if he can wrestle. But as I did say, I've seen Damon Wilson caught before. I don't think his striking defense is all that great. And his wrestling is good, but I've also seen his takedowns defended before. So I think that Barbosa can find success in that area on the feet. So at the moment, the final fight on the card is Trent Miller versus Ryan Gandra. Also a short notice fight with Trent Miller replacing Vitor Costa, who is a Fighting Nerds guy. Costa had visa issues. This fight, originally Gandra versus Costa, was also booked at 205 pounds, which was quite odd, because Gandra is a middleweight, and I think Costa was also a middleweight for a lot of his career, but that doesn't matter. We got Miller versus Gandra now. I think both of these guys actually fight in somewhat similar ways. I think Gandra is just a lot more aggressive and also more powerful. Gandra kind of reminds me of like a... I don't know how to say it nicely. Of like a worse Bruno Ferreira, in a way that when he throws his strikes, he is put in 125% into all of his power. He can be very patient. Like, he can spend a lot of time, especially in the Skimbumbule fight. He just kind of is doing nothing. He spends a lot of time doing nothing until he does something. His takedown defense is okay. It's pretty good. I mean, it held up very well against Vladimir Calvo. But it's also not fantastic at the same time, because Gambolino was able to get him down in that matchup, but he actually reversed it in the second round, and that's how he got the ground and pound TKO in round number 1. Gandra, as I did say, he's like Bruno Ferreira in a way that he's just going to come forward and he's going to throw power like an absolute madman. And I do think that even though he has been very low volume in some of his LFA fights in the past, I think that in this matchup, given it's the Contender Series, and given the fact that he's got someone else that's going to stand and bang with him, I think we're going to see a lot of volume out of Gandra in this matchup. So despite me just saying that I think he is a bit of a low volume fighter, I think we're actually going to see a lot of volume out of him in this fight, if that makes any sense. Trent Miller, on the other hand, he does have a wrestling background. I think it was his commentators on this Barbosa card were talking about how Trent Miller actually has a wrestling base, but he's fallen in love with his hands recently, which is an interesting comment to listen to the commentators. And I want to say as well about Barbosa, one of the biggest cages I have ever seen in my life. It was a massive cage. It was crazy how big the cage is for this card. But also, another fight I watched with Trent Miller was this matchup against Saeed Magomed Abdulrakhman, and I know this was at 195 pounds, but this guy was a giant. I actually might put a screenshot up there because it would also explain what I'm about to explain very well as well. Trent Miller has a very interesting striking style. He holds his hands like kind of by his shoulders at all times, and then he will throw combinations as well. He does throw a lot of volume. That's how he beat O'Sullivan, in my opinion, was the volume he put out there. But I think that he's got a bit of a weakness in the fact that he can get pressured. He lost to Buddy Wallace because Buddy Wallace was pressuring him forward on the feet a lot in this matchup, and that is how eventually he got it done. So what happened was this matchup started and Buddy Wallace just took the cage immediately and started throwing volume and backing up Trent Miller, and Trent Miller was getting backed up a lot, and eventually Buddy Wallace dropped him and submitted him in the second round. And for that reason, I actually am going to be picking Ryan Gandra, just for the fact that we can see Trent Miller get backed up in the fight. And, you know, I think the fact that Gandra is going to be pressuring forward and just throwing 125% of power, I think Miller is going to get backed up by that. Another comment I want to make as well is this stoppage was insane. I actually don't know what the ref was thinking when he stopped this fight, but to be fair, Saeed Magomed Abdulrakhman was gassed out beyond belief, but like this stoppage was crazy, absolutely ridiculous. I don't really know what else to say about this fight. I'm picking Gandra. I'm picking Gandra by knockout. I'm not that confident in it because I don't really think that Gandra's the best fighter in the world. But also the thing about Miller is his takedowns are pretty good, but I don't think that he's going to be able to wrestle as often as I think he's going to need to win this matchup. So that is it for me. Just to break down my predictions very quickly for you guys in case you don't want to watch the whole video because I am sick and honestly not a very great prediction video from me. I'm going to admit that. Hopefully the information provided was still pretty high level. I'm picking Donte Johnson by knockout. I'm picking Manoel Sousa by decision. I'm picking Abdulrakhman Yakhyaev by submission. I'm picking Marcio Barbosa by knockout. And I'm picking Ryan Gandra by knockout. So those are just my quick picks for those that don't want to listen to me sick for probably half an hour, I think. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching.